Andrew from Sachs, and welcome to video number 4 in our 7 video sequence on performance development, including 360-degree feedback. In the last video, I talked a lot about goals and how goals are crucial in very simple and free-form performance development processes, which I advocated strongly. And in the rest of this video sequence, we're talking about some ideas that can help you to retain the governance structure of formal performance development systems, but still make them work really well. In this one, we'll be talking about goals and what kinds of goals work. Goals are neurologically powerful, and here's some of the neuroscience associated with goals. Goals live to a certain extent in the prefrontal cortex, but in particular the medial prefrontal cortex. The medial prefrontal cortex makes decisions about what I'm going to do right now. So I remember coaching an individual once, and this individual had problems with time management. And in fact, we stuck stickers over all sorts of different places on his phone and on his bag and on his car. And the sticker said, "Is what I am about to do going to help me to achieve my goals?" Well, in fact, in his case, it worked well because it improved his time management. That's the medial prefrontal cortex decision. What am I going to do now and how it will contribute to my goal attainment? But of course, goals are not purely cognitive. They're not purely decision-making because there's an emotional component. And the emotional component is driven by the amygdala. And it can be driven by the amygdala in a positive way, which is sort of an energized pursuit of goals. And it can be driven to a certain extent in a negative way, which is where I'll get anxious if I don't achieve the goals. But your amygdala tends to direct you towards the goals that you care most deeply about. That's the emotional part of goals. Now, of course, one of the things that's really important for leadership is to ensure that goals are contributed to equally by leader and staff member, and that way the goal becomes a partnership. If the person has a goal purely and simply imposed on them, then that may well trigger that kind of defensive amygdala response. If it's a partnership, then the person will care about it, and so the amygdala will provide them with the encouragement, the energy to pursue it. So the role of the prefrontal cortex is to work out how to achieve the goal. The role of the amygdala is to direct you to the goals that you care most deeply about. So here's some other biological stuff associated with goals. So properly set goals can boost your systolic blood pressure. If a goal's easy to achieve, then you get a minor spike. If the goal is moderately hard but seems like a feasible challenge, we get a larger spike. And if the goal is seen as impossible, the system sort of gives up and you don't get any blood pressure increase. Goals should be difficult but not impossible. A goal that's too easy will give you some kind of a motivational benefit, a biological benefit as well as a neurological benefit. But the best goals are ones that you think, yeah, I really care about this. It's difficult, but I reckon I can do it. That's the best form of goals. Well, if you create a neural activation through systemic support, and what that means is that if you've got processes in your organization that will support those goals, and if you've got leadership that creates a sense of positive accountability, yeah, this is a great thing for us all to achieve, so let's pursue it, then of course, neurologically, the goal's going to work better. More neurological information on goals. As you can see from the details from the Balcetis article, if people pursue a goal which they've clearly envisaged in their own mind, I mean, maybe they picture themselves completing the project, or maybe if it's a race, running through the final barrier ahead of everybody else. If people do that, that clear visioning of goals makes it seem 30% easier to achieve those goals. So you can give yourself a pretty strong motivational boost by not just thinking about the goal as a journey to be achieved, but picturing yourself at the end point. It makes the goal seem easier. Second thing we know is that when goals look closer, progress that we make towards achieving them feels easier. So we psych ourselves up and not out. And the goal feels markedly easier, and so 17% was the estimate in Balcetis. Not only that, but clearly envisaging goals and then starting to proceed towards them can have a really strong effect on the speed of goal attainment. In other words, this isn't all just theoretical stuff that takes place within the mind. People achieve their goals markedly more quickly when they've undertaken an envisaging exercise. Good leadership, therefore, should not just say, all right, well, this is the goal. It should talk about the journey. Well, how are we going to get this done? And finally, it should talk about, and perhaps most importantly, it should talk about, well, what will it be like when we've achieved this? What will the end point be? A destination like that is an incredibly powerful thing to help people to change. Change is sometimes undertaken as, oh, we've got to get away from something. No, it works best when we've got to get towards something. Let's picture the ideal ultimate outcome and let's move towards that. Now, there's been lots of talk about SMART goals over the years, and SMART goals kind of come from two researchers by the name of Locke and Latham, who I'll quote later. But Locke and Latham spent 20 plus years researching the world of goals, very important researchers, and they've given us a lot of really, really useful understandings of why certain goals work and certain goals don't. And from their work came the concept of SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and trackable, or sometimes time-bound. Now, the SMART, different people use different letters for that. But the concept of good goals is that if you're using them in a performance development sense, it's really important that they're clear, and it's really important that once you get to the end of your cycle, in other words, when you're evaluating whether the goals have been achieved or not, it has to be really clear to both parties whether those goals have been actually attained. So SMART goals can be great by making them unambiguous. And that's a really important point. So when people are embarking on this sort of an exercise, they should reflect on what kinds of goals cause people to change. So as we've already said from the Balcetis article, goals should be achievable but not easy. So if they lack stretch or are impossible, they don't work. There should be no more than 7. Let me describe Locke and Latham's research in this respect. Locke and Latham looked at how many goals the average person can pursue at any one time. So you can imagine if your boss says to you, here is one goal that you must achieve in this year. And you think, okay, well, I think that's an achievable goal. Well, the probability of you achieving that goal is really high. If, on the other hand, your boss says to you, here are 100 achievable goals that you need to achieve in the course of the next year, and you think, okay, well, they all seem individually achievable, but they're not easy. Well, the probability of you achieving those goals is quite low. 100 is too many. So Locke and Latham researched by increasing the number of goals that people were to pursue in undertaking certain tasks. And what they found was up to about 5, most people could cope comfortably with 5 goals. When you go to 6 goals, a certain slice of the population acts as though they have no goals whatsoever. If you go to 7, 8, 9, it drops off increasingly, so that once you get past about 10 goals or something like that, it's far too many. So if you're building a performance development system which is based on goals, it's absolutely crucial to make sure that there are not too many goals. And that's a mistake that's made all the time in performance development system. Dozens of KPIs. I'm going to talk in a subsequent video about this idea of pursuing outcomes, measuring success through outcomes. Outcome measurement is an excellent form of performance development. Don't talk about what the job should do, talk about the outcomes that the job needs to achieve. People ideally shouldn't have goals imposed on them. Having personal ownership helps them. If you tell me you must achieve this goal, and I think, well, why do I have to achieve that? Then my motivation to pursue that goal is minor. If, on the other hand, you get me to contribute to, and we have a conversation about what I should be achieving, then what we can do is we can partner on the pursuit of that goal, and that's going to make the goal far more powerful. Now, I just want to talk about this idea of trust and legalism of goals. If people have not been down this path before, or let's say there's a less than optimum level of trust between leader and staff member, the goals sort of get written like a contract. You know, on this date, by this time, you will have achieved this with certain standards of quality or whatever. As trust builds between leader and staff member, what you'll end up with is a situation where the goal can be accepted as being clear enough, provided that there's an interpersonal trust between the leader and staff member. So in other words, this is in effect the staff member putting in the leader's hands the trust to say, well, yeah, I can accept that if you say that this goal has been achieved, it's been achieved. And if not, I can live with that as well. So that's why the interpersonal relationship between the staff member and the leader is so crucial, because that means you don't have to write every goal as some kind of buttoned-down contract as though it's been written by a contracts lawyer or something like that. Then that raises the question of what types of goals there needs to be in a performance development process. And I think in general they fit into 2 categories. There's the what of the job and the how of the job. So the what of the job is work execution goals, which might be volume, they might be quality, they might be innovation. These are the what of the job. The second component is the how of the job. And the how of the job is the professionalism of the behaviours, the appropriateness of the behaviours. Now, this is new for most people because if you accept our recommendation that good performance development systems are goal-based, then what that means is that you have to set objectives around behaviours. And so the how of the job, how will this person behave? How will they respond to colleagues? How will they respond to customers? How will they respond to stakeholders outside the organisation? We've got to be able to define that. So that's the how goals. But they're not the only how goals, because in addition, you can have goals associated with the learning and development that's necessary to be undertaken in a particular job. So that could be what is to be learned and when. It could be the method of learning. It could be behaviour change arising from the learning objectives. It could also be as part of the learning and development goals, and I particularly like this, I recommend this to clients all the time, that a person goes and learns something and they come back, but part of the goal is that they've got to teach it to their colleagues. Not to everybody if they don't want to learn it, but to the colleagues who are interested or for whom there might be value in that learning. So that means that there's leverage in sending somebody away to get learning. And of course also, then you get this consolidation of learning the person who's gone away because they concentrate hard, they take it seriously because they know that they're going to have to teach their colleagues. So that's a perspective on learning goals. In addition, there are career development goals. So people vary enormously when it comes to career development. You will have people that I like to call the safe pair of hands, and they love doing what they're doing right now. They turn up to work, they're happy, they're engaged. They just want to do this job for the rest of their life. That's fine. Maybe for those people you don't have career development goals. It's not compulsory. On the other hand, this person is a graduate and they want to become a chief executive. So if they are passionately committed to that course of development in their career, then having a long-term goal of a chief executive attainment is perhaps not a really useful goal. Let's work into their development plan steps that will help them move along towards that objective, like maybe developing people leadership experience, or maybe it's to do with developing their capacity to understand strategy or whatever. But career development goals can be really powerful. So in effect, you've got the what goals, which are about role achievement. You've got the how goals, which are about behaviours. You've got learning and development goals. And then the fourth is that you have career development goals. If you've got that, you've got pretty much everything that a performance development system can reasonably deal with. Now, as I said earlier, make sure if you do have those four things that you still have no more than, let's say, a maximum of 7 goals, because beyond that, it's highly unlikely to work. So here are some examples of work achievement. So effective stakeholder management, identify key stakeholders, develop a stakeholder management plan, and by the end of the year, develop a full stakeholder management plan agreed by CEO and will have met the milestones. So that's one example. They've got others here about contract compliance and client feedback. This is a professionalism or a how goal, a behaviour goal. Teamwork. Consider possible initiatives to increase team cohesion. 360-degree feedback shows that X is rated above satisfactory on the measure for teamwork. Another one would be X will have undertaken 3 key initiatives which will increase team cohesion ratings on a culture survey. So we're talking about behaviours. Advocacy, identify key stakeholders, organise meetings with key stakeholders. X will have arranged and completed 5 meetings with key stakeholders with demonstrable outcomes. Then we move on to learning and development goals, and you see advanced Excel spreadsheets, actions. We'll talk about what's necessary to do this, including booking a formal course to be completed, and it'll be completed satisfactory. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the person will run a training session for colleagues on what was learned in that course. Then there's a new concept of goals called open goals. And the idea of open goals is they're kind of the opposite, in a sense, of SMART goals. We know that SMART goals work, but they don't work for everything. And what's been discovered is, let's say you want to improve your fitness. If you, let's say, decide that you want to lose 2 kilograms and be a certain weight by the end of a certain period, if you don't achieve that, but let's say you achieve 95% of it, there is research evidence to say that that is demotivating for you. Even though you did so much good work, you got the bulk of the job done, the fact that you didn't meet the hard goal means that you'll be dissatisfied and maybe a little demoralized by that. The concept of an open goal is that it's an exploratory goal. So, for instance, instead of saying, I am going to lose this much weight, you say, well, look, let me figure out how much weight I can lose. Let me try a whole bunch of things, and let's monitor how I'm going. And it's been shown that people are much less likely to give up on open goals in their personal life than they do if they set hard goals. Because the moment you feel I can't reach a hard goal, it slips into the impossible category. But an exploration goal, you can imagine the situation that we said before. I have to lose 2 kilos, and you lose all but the last couple of grams. Whereas in an open goal, you'd say, well, look, how much weight can I lose? Let's explore improving my fitness, and let's explore changing my diet. And then you get to, let's say, 1.9 kilos. Well, in an open goal setting, you're likely to say, fantastic, this is working, so I will continue. Now, the big question is whether this applies well to the workplace. And the honest truth is that the research in this is very recent, and we honestly don't know yet whether open goals work brilliantly in the workplace. We know certain aspects of open goals work well. So, for instance, trying to improve collegiality in a team can work well with open goals. But there is a very open research agenda there to find out more about those, and we will be partially involved in creating that kind of research in our research partnership with our academic partners. In the next video, we'll be talking about job definition as goals for performance development. Job definition, which is based on outcomes, can be very easily plugged into performance development systems and can ensure that they're well attuned to whatever you as an organisation seek to achieve. Click on the link near this video to join us for the next in this sequence.